A geopolitical tremor has shaken North America, sending shockwaves through the very heart of the continent. What was once a seamless connection between the United States and its northern neighbor has now become a flashpoint in a rapidly changing world. The long-standing relationship between the US and Canada, built on decades of trust and cooperation, is suddenly under immense strain. In a move that stunned both citizens and officials, Canada has blocked the main land route connecting the US to Alaska. The border, usually a symbol of open trade and friendly passage, is now marked by barriers and uncertainty. For thousands who rely on this route, the closure is more than an inconvenience. It's a lifeline abruptly severed. This isn't a military blockade, but an economic one, a calculated response to a rapidly escalating trade war between the two nations. Instead of soldiers, it's customs officers and border agents who now stand guard, enforcing new restrictions that ripple through every sector of the economy. The impact is immediate and far-reaching, affecting not just governments, but ordinary people on both sides of the border. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of partnership and shared purpose, has become a pressure point in this standoff. British Columbia's proposed tolls threaten to isolate Alaska even further, turning a vital artery into a costly obstacle. The highway, which for decades has carried goods, families, and dreams across vast wilderness, now stands as a stark reminder of how quickly alliances can shift. The move caught Washington off guard, exposing Alaska's unique vulnerability, separated from the lower 48 by nearly 500 miles of Canadian territory. This vast expanse of forest and mountain, once a mere geographic fact, has become a strategic weakness. The logistical challenge of supplying Alaska has never been more apparent, and the state's dependence on this single corridor is now a glaring issue for policymakers. As supply chains are threatened, the livelihoods of truckers, tourism operators, and families in Anchorage hang in the balance. Truckers face long delays and uncertain routes, while store shelves in Alaska's cities begin to empty. Tour operators worry about a lost season, and families scramble to secure essentials. The ripple effects reach every corner of the state, highlighting just how interconnected and fragile modern life can be. The Continental choke point has been squeezed, and the consequences are just beginning to unfold. As tensions rise and uncertainty grows, the world watches to see how North America will navigate this unprecedented crisis. The decisions made in the coming days will shape not only the fate of Alaska, but the future of cross-border relations for years to come. The crisis began with President Trump's threat, a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. Canada, refusing to be strong-armed, announced its own retaliatory tariffs. But the real escalation came from the provinces. British Columbia and others targeted American vulnerabilities. Trump's America First doctrine underestimated Canada's resolve and the deep economic ties across the border. The one-month delay for negotiations became Canada's window to plan a precise counterattack. Provincial leaders zeroed in on Alaska's supply route, setting the stage for a tit-for-tat escalation. The spark was lit. The firestorm was about to spread. Canada's response to the escalating trade dispute was anything but simple. Rather than relying on a single tactic, Canadian officials crafted a multi-pronged strategy, carefully weighing the potential impact of each move. Behind closed doors in Ottawa, federal leaders met with their provincial counterparts, determined to send a clear message to Washington. Canada would not be bullied into submission. Among the various measures considered, British Columbia's so-called Alaska toll quickly emerged as the boldest and most headline-grabbing. Premier David Eby took to the podium, unveiling legislation that would impose steep tolls on U.S. trucks traveling through British Columbia en route to Alaska. The tolls were specifically designed to hit high-value, time-sensitive cargo, goods that couldn't afford delays or detours. The message was unmistakable. If the U.S. hurt Canada's economy, then Alaska's vital supply line would feel the squeeze. The Alaska Highway, a lifeline for the state, suddenly became a powerful bargaining chip in Canada's hands. Other provinces quickly followed suit, each targeting American vulnerabilities in their own way. Ontario, for example, slapped a hefty surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., threatening to raise costs for American consumers and businesses that relied on Canadian power. In the north, Yukon introduced new restrictions on U.S. products and government contracts, making it harder for American companies to do business in the territory. Instead of simply matching U.S. tariffs with tariffs of their own, Canadian leaders chose to exploit specific American weaknesses, targeting sectors and regions where the U.S. was most exposed. The Alaska toll, while not yet implemented, was more than just a threat. It was a technically feasible plan, carefully designed for maximum economic and political impact. Engineers and policy experts had already mapped out how the tolls could be collected and enforced, and the infrastructure was largely in place. What was perhaps most remarkable was the unity shown by Canada's federal and provincial leaders. Despite their usual political differences, they stood together, presenting a united front to the world and to the United States. This nationwide counterpunch transformed what began as a simple trade dispute into a complex, multi-front conflict. Every region of Canada found a way to contribute, turning local leverage into national strength. For the United States, the consequences were immediate and tangible. Instead of facing broad, easily countered economic measures, American businesses and truckers now encountered targeted disruptions at key choke points. The message was clear. Canada was prepared to fight back, and it knew exactly where to apply pressure. Alaska is an economic exclave, uniquely separated from the rest of the United States by vast stretches of Canadian wilderness. Its survival depends on a fragile network of land routes that wind through Canada, connecting Alaskans to the lower 48. This isolation shapes every aspect of life here, from the food on store shelves to the fuel that powers homes and businesses. For Alaskans, the border is not just a line on a map, it's a lifeline. Over $1.3 billion in annual trade flows through these crossings each year, supporting more than 20,000 jobs across industries as diverse as shipping, retail, and logistics. Every day, dozens of trucks cross the border, carrying everything from fresh produce to building materials, ensuring that Alaskan communities remain supplied and connected to the outside world. The Alaska Highway is the state's main artery, a critical supply route that brings in most of Alaska's fresh food, medicine, and essential goods. Without it, store shelves would quickly empty, and vital services would grind to a halt. The journey is long and often treacherous, but it is the only reliable link between Alaska and the rest of the country. Now, proposed tolls on these routes threaten to sever this lifeline. If enacted, they could lead to empty shelves, soaring prices, and uncertainty for families and businesses alike. The prospect of new costs and delays has left many Alaskans anxious about the future, wondering how they will weather the storm. Alaska's vital oil, construction, and retail sectors all depend on the uninterrupted flow of goods along this corridor. Any disruption could ripple through the economy, affecting everything from energy production to the availability of everyday necessities. The Alaska Trucking Association has sounded the alarm, warning that new tolls could create chaos on the roads and impose heavy economic burdens on businesses and consumers. Truckers, already facing long hours and harsh conditions, worry that added costs will make their jobs even harder and threaten the stability of the supply chain. But the impact goes beyond economics. For decades, the border has stood as a symbol of cooperation and shared northern identity between Canada and Alaska. Now, with trust shaken and uncertainty looming, that sense of partnership is at risk. As Alaska braces for impact, its people face an uncertain future, hoping that the lifeline connecting them to the world will endure these new challenges. For Alaska's 730,000 residents, this trade war is personal. Already high prices for basics could skyrocket as new tolls hit supply chains. Job losses loom in trucking, construction, and retail as costs rise and routes shrink. The psychological toll is real. Uncertainty about food, medicine, and daily essentials erodes community security. Tourism, another economic pillar, faces disruption as travelers and seasonal workers reconsider Alaska. The conflict threatens to isolate the state, raising costs and dimming opportunities. For Alaskans, the price of this trade war is steep and immediate. Washington sought leverage by targeting Canada's cruise industry. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan pushed for a waiver to the Passenger Vessel Services Act, allowing cruise ships to bypass Canadian ports. This would devastate British Columbia's tourism sector, rerouting millions in revenue to U.S. ports. The threat turned cruise ships into pawns in the escalating conflict. What began as a tariff dispute now threatened cross-border tourism and services. both sides weaponized their economic ties, risking long-term damage to partnership. The cruise ship showdown raised the stakes, with coastal communities' fortunes hanging in the balance. The inside passage became a geopolitical chessboard. Alaska's response was swift. Lawmakers united, urging both governments to de-escalate. Governor Dunleavy called for federal intervention, warning against state-level retaliation. Business leaders predicted chaos and economic pain, feeling Alaska was a hostage in a larger game. In Canada, the mood was resolute. Premier Eby defended the toll as self-defense, not aggression. Canadians rallied behind their leaders, seeing the U.S. tariffs as bullying. The emotional divide grew. Alaskans pleaded for relief, Canadians dug in. Political resolve and public support in Canada created a formidable front. The standoff deepened, with both sides convinced of their cause. As 2025 unfolds, the future of U.S.-Canada relations hangs in the balance. If tariffs and countermeasures are enacted, a full-blown trade war looms. Behind the scenes, diplomats scramble for a face-saving off-ramp. Both sides must weigh short-term gains against long-term partnership. A negotiated settlement could restore calm, but mistrust will linger. The worst-case, endless escalation, poisoning relations for years. For Alaska, the stakes are existential. Only careful diplomacy can avert disaster. The 2025 U.S.-Canada trade dispute has pushed a historic friendship to the brink. Canada's targeting of Alaska's land route exposed deep vulnerabilities and a willingness to use economic weapons. The open border is now a battlefield, with ordinary people paying the price. Subnational governments and obscure laws became tools in a high-stakes game. The crisis sets a dangerous precedent for future disputes. Trust is eroded, and rebuilding it will be difficult. North America's prosperity depends on restoring bridges, not building walls.